The cold black space around Commander Tae-ho Kim looked like death itself. His small escape pod spun slowly through the void, while massive alien ships moved closer like giant metal sharks hunting for prey. His destroyer had been blown to pieces. Just 3 hours ago, during what Earth Command had called a peaceful first contact mission with the beings who ruled this part of the galaxy, Tae-ho pressed his face against the small window and counted 7 enemy ships, each one bigger than any warship Earth had ever built. The aliens called themselves the Rokari Empire, and their first hello to humanity had been laser cannons and missile swarms that turned his ship into floating scrap metal. 200 good sailors had died in those first few minutes, and now he was the only one left to tell the story. The nearest Rokari ship was close enough that he could see details of its dark metal hull covered in spikes and weapon ports, like some nightmare castle floating in space. A bright blue tractor beam reached out from the ship and grabbed his pod, pulling him toward an opening that looked like a giant mouth ready to swallow him. Whole, Tae-ho took 3 deep breaths and centered himself the way his SEAL instructors had taught him 15 years ago. Fear was just another enemy to defeat, and he had been defeating enemies since he was 18 years old. The aliens might be bigger and stronger than humans, but they had never met a United States Navy SEAL before, and that was going to be their first mistake. The pod shook and bumped as it was pulled inside the alien ship, and Tae-ho could hear the hiss of atmosphere being pumped into the docking bay. Through the window, he saw creatures that looked like giant lizards, walking on 2 legs, each one standing at least 8 feet tall, with thick scales covering their bodies like natural armor. Their heads were long and narrow like crocodiles, with rows of sharp teeth and yellow eyes that glowed in the dim light. Heavy footsteps approached his pod, and Tae-ho heard the screech of metal being torn apart as powerful claws ripped open his escape pod door. The first alien to look inside was even bigger than the others, with old battle scars covering his scales and a crown of metal spikes around his massive head. This had to be their leader. The alien leader studied Tae-ho with those glowing yellow eyes and spoke in broken English that sounded like rocks grinding together. "You are the human warrior we captured." From the destroyed ship, Tae-ho stood up slowly, keeping his hands visible, but ready to move fast if needed. "I am Commander Tae-ho Kim of the Earth Navy." The alien made a sound that might have been laughter, but sounded more like a growling dog. "I am Emperor Vorthak, ruler of the Rokari Empire and conqueror of 47 star systems. Your pathetic little ship thought it could challenge our might. We have been watching your species through your radio signals for many years. Humans are weak creatures, with soft skin and fragile bones. More Rokari soldiers gathered around the pod, pointing weapons that looked like they could blow holes through steel walls. Tae-ho counted 12 aliens total and noted that they carried their weapons casually without proper tactical spacing. They were confident to the point of carelessness, which was exactly the kind of mistake that got people killed in combat. "Your species will make good slaves once we finish conquering your home world," Vorthak continued. "But first, you will provide entertainment for my people. You will fight in our arena of blood, where warriors from across the galaxy come to die for the amusement of their betters." The Emperor gestured toward a massive screen on the wall that showed what looked like a hellish fighting pit, surrounded by thousands of alien spectators. The arena floor was black sand, stained dark with old blood, and the walls were covered with weapons and torture devices that belonged in a museum of nightmares. 7 trials await every fighter who enters the arena. Vorthak explained with obvious pleasure. The maze of razors cuts flesh from bone. The gravity crushes warriors into paste. The flame pits burn away everything but screams. The acid rain dissolves armor and skin alike. The combat beasts tear apart anything that moves. The mind maze drives fighters insane with psychic attacks. And finally, those few who somehow survive must face our ultimate champion, the blood god who has killed over 1,000. Warriors in single combat. Tae-ho, listened to this list of horrors, and felt something that the aliens would never understand. He felt excited. These creatures thought they were describing his doom, but they were actually describing the most challenging training course he had ever heard of, and Navy SEALs lived for impossible challenges. No warrior has ever survived all 7 trials in the 1,000-year history of our arena. Your death will be broadcast across the galaxy to show every species what happens to those who resist the Rokari Empire. 2 soldiers grabbed Tae-ho by the arms and started dragging him toward what looked like a prison entrance. Their claws dug into his combat uniform, but he did not resist yet. He needed to see more of. Their ship learned their weaknesses and understand how they thought before he made any moves as they walked through corridors lined with trophy cases full of weapons and armor from defeated enemies. Tae-ho used his training to memorize every detail. The layout of the ship, the number of guards, the location of weapon storage areas, and emergency exits. His instructors at SEAL training had drilled into him that intelligence gathering never stopped even when you were a prisoner. The holding cells were deep in the ship below the arena and filled with the sounds of dozens of different alien species, all waiting for their turn to die. Tae-ho was thrown into a small metal room with bars for a door and a simple bed that looked like it had seen better centuries. Through the bars, he could see other prisoners, and most of them looked like professional soldiers or warriors from their various worlds. Big creatures with natural weapons and armor that made them look like walking tanks. Yet every single one of them had the same look in their eyes, the hollow stare of beings who had accepted their own death. That night, as alien guards walked past his cell, placing bets on how quickly the human would die in the arena, Tae-ho began his preparation. Routine push-ups, sit-ups, stretching exercises, and mental rehearsal of combat scenarios. His body might be trapped, but his mind was free to plan and prepare. The Rokari guards laughed at the sight of the small human exercising. "Look at the tiny warrior." Preparing for battle, one guard said to another, "He thinks his weak human muscles will help him survive what has killed the greatest fighters in the galaxy." They had no idea that they were watching a predator getting ready to hunt. The arena had been designed to break the spirits of fighters before it broke their bodies. But Tae-ho Kim had been forged in the furnace of SEAL training, where instructors spent months teaching candidates that the only easy day was yesterday and that quitting was not an option. As he counted out his final set of push-ups, Tae-ho smiled for the first time since his capture. These aliens were about to learn why Earth had produced warriors who could fight in any environment against any enemy and never stop believing that victory was possible. They thought they had captured a helpless prisoner, but they had actually grabbed a United States Navy SEAL, and that was going to make all the difference in the galaxy. The prison cells beneath the arena buzzed with the nervous sounds of dozens of alien species, all waiting for their names to be called, for the fighting pits above Tae-ho Kim had been in the holding area for 2 days now, and he had spent every waking moment listening, watching, and learning everything he could about his enemies and the challenge that waited for him. His cellmate was a blue-skinned warrior called Minsu, whose species had been conquered by the Rokari Empire 3 years earlier. The alien looked like he had been designed for war, with 6 powerful arms, natural armor plating across his chest and back, and muscles that could probably bend steel bars like rubber bands. Yet even this living weapon trembled when he talked about the arena of blood. The trials are not just about fighting. Minsu whispered during the dark hours when the guards were fewer. They are designed by the cruelest minds in the galaxy. Each one tests a different way to die, and the Rokari have spent centuries perfecting them so that no warrior can find a way through. Tae-ho sat cross-legged on his simple bed, listening carefully to every detail. His SEAL training had taught him that intelligence was more valuable than weapons, and right now, information about the arena was the only weapon he had. "Tell me about each trial," he said quietly. Minsu looked around nervously, then moved closer to the bars that separated them from the corridor. The first is the maze of razors. He began. It looks simple, just a path through walls, but every surface is covered with hidden blade traps. Motion sensors trigger spinning discs of metal that can cut through bone. Pressure plates release wall spikes fast enough to pin a warrior before he can dodge. I have seen fighters enter that maze and come out the other side as nothing but pieces. The second trial is the gravity. Well, Min Su continued. They put you in a chamber and slowly increase the artificial gravity. Most species can handle twice their normal weight, but the machine goes up to 10 times normal gravity. I watched a Thorian warrior whose bones were harder than steel get crushed into paste while his armor cracked like an eggshell. Taeho nodded and filed away every detail. His mind was already working on solutions, remembering training exercises in crushing ocean depths and combat scenarios where normal movement was impossible. What about the third trial? The flame pits, Min Su said with a shudder. Temperatures hot enough to melt metal. The air itself catches fire. Warriors try to run through quickly, but the heat cooks them from the inside out. Their blood boils in their veins, and they collapse, screaming until the flames take them. The fourth trial killed my brother, Min Su added with pain in his voice. The acid rain chamber drops caustic liquid from the ceiling that can dissolve armor and flesh in seconds. The pattern looks random, but there are safe zones if you can find them. My brother was the fastest warrior of our species, but he could not dodge the acid drops forever. Taeho was starting to understand the pattern. Each trial was designed to exploit a different type of strength. Speed meant nothing in the gravity. Well armor was useless against the acid rain. Natural weapons could not fight flames or spinning razor blades. Tell me about the final 3 trials. The combat beasts are from 3 different death worlds. Min Su explained: a venom, drake that spits acid and has scales harder than starship hulls, a thunder rhino whose charge can break through fortress walls, and a shadow wolf pack that hunts by sensing fear. The 3 beasts are released together, and they have killed teams of 20 warriors working together. The 6th trial is the mind maze, where psychic attacks drive fighters insane before they can defend themselves. I have seen warriors claw out their own eyes trying to escape the hallucinations. The mental assault is designed to find every fear, every weakness, every memory that causes pain and turn them into weapons against the fighter. And the 7th trial, Min Su said, with absolute hopelessness in his voice: combat against their ultimate champion, the Blood God, a creature 15 feet tall, covered in natural armor, with 4 arms ending in claws that can cut through steel. He has fought for over 2 centuries and never lost a single battle. The trophy wall in his lair is made from the bones of every warrior species in the galaxy. That night, when the other prisoners had finally fallen into restless sleep, Taeho began his real preparation. He had heard enough about the trials to understand that brute force and traditional fighting methods would not work. The arena had been specifically designed to defeat every type of warrior the galaxy had produced, but the galaxy had never produced a United States Navy. SEAL Taeho started with meditation exercises that helped him control his breathing and heart rate under extreme stress. His instructors had taught him that panic was the enemy that killed more soldiers than bullets or explosions. When fear took control of a fighter's mind, that warrior was already dead. Next came mental rehearsal of each trial, using visualization techniques that let him practice solutions without physical movement. He imagined himself in the maze of razors, moving like smoke through the deadly traps. He saw himself in the gravity well, adapting to crushing pressure, the way he had learned to function in deep ocean training, the Rokari guards. Walked past his cell several times during the night, placing new bets on how the human would die. Some thought the razor maze would cut him apart in the first few minutes. Others believed the gravity chamber would crush him before he could take 10 steps. The longest anyone gave him was reaching the 4th trial before the acid rain dissolved his soft human flesh. None of them understood that they were looking at a warrior who had been trained from the beginning to do impossible things. SEAL training had taught Tae-ho that the human body and mind could adapt to any challenge if properly prepared. The trials might have killed every other species, but humans were different. Humans had evolved on a death world where everything from the weather to the wildlife was trying to kill them. They had learned to use tools and tactics to defeat enemies that were bigger, stronger, and better armed. They had developed the ability to think their way out of situations where muscle and natural weapons failed. As the guards laughed about the coming entertainment, Tae-ho continued his preparation routine: push-ups to maintain muscle tone, breathing exercises to control stress response, and mental planning for scenarios that would have given nightmares to normal people. The most important part of his preparation was psychological. He had to maintain the proper mindset for what was coming. The arena was designed to break spirits before it broke bodies. Warriors who entered expecting to die usually got exactly what they expected, but Tae-ho Kim had never entered a fight expecting to lose. His SEAL instructors had beaten one lesson into him more than any other. The only easy day was yesterday, and there was no situation so impossible that a properly trained warrior could not find a way to victory. When morning came and the guards began selecting fighters for the day's entertainment, Tae-ho was ready. He had studied his enemies, learned their weaknesses, and prepared his mind and body for the greatest challenge of his life. The Rokari thought they were about to watch another routine execution for the entertainment of their empire. Instead, they were about to discover why Earth had produced warriors who could succeed where the greatest fighters in the galaxy had failed and smile while doing it. The morning of the trials arrived with the sound of boots marching through the prison corridors and the electronic hum of cameras being activated throughout the arena complex. Tae-ho Kim had been awake for hours doing final preparations when the guards came for him, but he showed no signs of nervousness or fear as they unlocked his cell door. The walk from the prison to the arena entrance took them through corridors lined with trophy cases filled with weapons and armor from thousands of dead warriors. Each display had a small plaque telling the story of how that particular fighter had died in the trials. Tae-ho read several of them as they walked and noticed that most warriors had died trying to use brute force against challenges that required different solutions. The entrance to the arena of blood was a massive archway carved with scenes of combat and death in exquisite detail. The roar of the crowd could be heard even through the thick stone walls as tens of thousands of aliens from across the galaxy filled the seats to watch another warrior die for their entertainment. Emperor Vorthak stood on his viewing platform high above the arena floor, wearing ceremonial armor decorated with the bones of defeated enemies, his yellow eyes fixed on Tae-ho with the hungry look of a predator who had found easy prey. The Emperor raised one massive clawed hand, and the crowd fell silent. Today we present for your entertainment a warrior from the species called humans, Vorthak, announced in a voice that echoed through the arena. This creature comes from a world unknown to our empire, but claims to be a soldier of their military forces. We shall see how long such a soft, weak being can survive against trials that have killed the greatest fighters in the galaxy. The crowd responded with bloodthirsty cheers and alien voices calling out bets on how quickly the human would die. Some spectators held up signs with pictures showing different ways the trials might kill him, while others waved flags from their home worlds, eager to see if this new species could last longer than their own fallen champions. Tae-ho was given basic combat clothing, but no weapons or armor as he stepped through the final doorway onto the black sand of the arena floor. The sand was stained dark red from centuries of spilled blood, and the air itself seemed heavy with the weight of all the death that had happened in this place. The first trial began immediately as walls rose from the arena floor, forming the maze of razors, a twisting labyrinth filled with death traps designed to slice apart anyone who tried to navigate through it. The walls were covered with hidden sensors that would trigger spinning blade discs and pressure. plates that released spikes fast enough to pin a warrior before he could react. Previous fighters had tried to charge through the maze using speed and brute force, hoping to reach the exit before the traps could kill them. The remains of their attempts were still visible as dark stains on the walls and scattered pieces of armor embedded in the surfaces. Taeho approached the maze entrance differently. He moved slowly and carefully, studying every surface for signs of the hidden triggers, his seal. Training had included extensive work with explosive devices and booby traps, which had taught him to read the subtle signs that revealed dangerous mechanisms. The crowd grew restless as he spent long minutes examining the first few walls without. Moving forward, they had expected him to charge in recklessly like most fighters, but instead he was acting like he was conducting some kind of technical inspection. When he finally began moving through the maze, Taeho flowed like water around the death traps. His movements were economical and precise, wasting no energy on unnecessary actions. When motion sensors tried to track him, he was already in their blind spots. When pressure plates waited for his weight, he stepped on the reinforced edges that would not trigger the mechanisms. A spinning razor disc shot out from a wall slot, moving fast enough to cut a warrior in half. But Taeho had already read the angle of the mechanism and dropped into a roll that carried him safely beneath. The deadly blade. The crowd murmured with surprise as he emerged from the maze without a single cut on his body. The second trial began as soon as he cleared the maze exit, the gravity. Weld chamber rose around him, and artificial gravity began increasing, slowly, from normal to twice Earth standard. The crushing force that had pulverized alien warriors whose bones were harder than steel began pressing down on Taeho like the weight of an entire mountain, but Taeho had trained in conditions that would have killed most humans. He had learned to function during deep ocean exercises where water pressure created forces similar to what he was experiencing now. His body had been conditioned through years of physical training to operate under stress. That would have crushed unprepared fighters as the gravity increased to levels that should have flattened him. Taeho adapted his movement and breathing. He crawled when he could not walk, rolled when he could not crawl, and somehow continued moving toward the chamber exit while alien spectators watched in growing amazement. The crowd had fallen completely silent as they watched this small human accomplish what their greatest champions had failed to do. Emperor Vorthak leaned forward on his throne, his confident expression beginning to change to something that might have been concern. The third trial brought the flame pits where temperatures hot enough to melt starship hulls had cooked previous fighters from the inside out. The air itself caught fire as Taeho entered the chamber, and waves of heat that could kill most life forms washed over him like the breath of some ancient dragon. Other species had tried to run through the inferno as quickly as possible, hoping to reach the exit before the heat could kill them. But their panicked rushing had only made them breathe more of the superheated air that cooked their lungs and blood vessels from within. Taeho had survived desert training exercises in temperatures that regularly killed unprepared humans. He controlled his breathing to protect his lungs from the worst of the heat and moved with steady purpose rather than desperate panic. His tactical mind found the path through the flames that offered the best protection from the worst temperatures. When he emerged from the flame pits with only minor burns on his exposed skin, the arena had become so quiet that individual voices could be heard from the highest seats, aliens who had come expecting easy entertainment were beginning to realize they were watching something unprecedented in the 1,000-year history of the trials. The fourth trial had been designed as the absolute limit where every challenger was supposed to die. The acid rain chamber had dissolved warriors whose natural armor could stop high-powered weapons as caustic drops fell from the ceiling in patterns that seemed random but were actually carefully designed to make survival impossible. As the first drops of acid began, falling Taeho studied their patterns with the same analytical mind that had guided him through urban warfare scenarios where one wrong step meant death. He mapped safe zones and dangerous areas using spatial reasoning skills developed through years of tactical planning. The crowd watched in absolute silence as he moved like a dancer between the deadly raindrops, using pieces of fallen warriors' armor as temporary shields when necessary. Every step was calculated, every movement precise, as he navigated through the chamber that had killed champions from dozens of different worlds. When he emerged from the acid rain completely unharmed, Emperor Vorthak stood up from his throne for the first time in living memory. His massive clawed hands gripped the railing of his viewing platform hard enough to leave marks in the metal as he stared down at the small human who had just done the impossible. Around the arena, alien spectators from species that had been enslaved by the Rokari. Empire began to whisper among themselves. For the first time in generations, they were seeing their supposedly invincible overlords faced with something they could not understand or control. Tai-Ho looked up at the Emperor and the thousands of watching aliens and smiled the same calm, confident smile he had worn during his hardest SEAL training exercises. The trials that were supposed to have killed him by now had only served as a warm-up for what was still to come. The fifth trial was supposed to be where the human finally died, like every other warrior who had somehow managed to survive the first 4 challenges. The Combat Beasts arena opened, and 3 creatures from different death worlds were released, simultaneously, each one designed by evolution to be the perfect killing machine. The Venom Drake came first, sliding out of its holding pen like a living nightmare. The creature was the size of an earth elephant, but built like a giant snake, with scales harder than starship armor and acid glands that could dissolve metal with every breath. Its yellow eyes fixed on Tai-Ho with the cold intelligence of a predator that had never met anything it could not kill. The Thunder Rhino charged out, next making the arena floor shake with every step. The massive beast looked like someone had crossed a rhinoceros with a battering ram and then covered the result in natural armor plating. Its horn was designed to punch through fortress walls, and its hide could stop bullets from military-grade weapons. The Shadow Wolf pack emerged last, moving like liquid darkness across the arena floor. These creatures hunted by sensing the fear and desperation of their prey, and they had never encountered anything that did not radiate terror when faced with their approach. The pack leader was nearly as large as the other 2 beasts, but moved with the silent grace of a born killer. The crowd expected this to be the moment when the human finally showed proper fear and died screaming like so many warriors before him. Instead, Tai-Ho Kim looked at the 3 Death World predators approaching him and smiled with genuine pleasure. This was what he had trained for his entire adult life. Not fair fights against equal opponents, but impossible odds that required every ounce of skill, cunning, and tactical thinking he possessed. The beasts were individually more powerful than anything on Earth, but they had never faced someone who had been taught to turn enemy strengths into weaknesses, the Venom. Drake attacked first, spitting a stream of acid that could melt through steel armor. Tai-Ho was already moving before the creature finished opening its mouth, rolling sideways and coming up behind a piece of debris from previous trials. The acid splashed harmlessly against the barrier, while Tai-Ho studied the angles and timing of the creature's attacks. The Thunder Rhino charged with earth-shaking force, expecting to flatten the small human against the arena wall. But Tai-Ho had learned to fight in urban environments where massive vehicles and heavy machinery were common obstacles to overcome. He waited until the last possible second, then dropped and rolled, causing the charging beast to slam into the wall with enough force to crack the stone. While the Thunder Rhino was stunned from its collision, Tai-Ho moved with fluid precision. He had noticed that the Venom Drake always aimed its acid spit at chest level, expecting targets. To be standing upright by staying low and using the confused Rhino as cover, he maneuvered the Drake into position for what came next. The Shadow Wolf pack attacked as a coordinated unit, the way they had been hunting for millions of years. But their Coordination became their weakness when Taeho used their own pack tactics against them. He moved in ways that caused them to interfere with each other, positioning himself so that their attacks would cross paths and create confusion in their formation. The moment Taeho had been setting up arrived when all three beasts were close together and focused on him. The venom drake spat another stream of acid, but Taeho had already rolled away, leaving the corrosive liquid to splash across the thunder rhinos. "Face!" The massive beast roared in pain and charged blindly forward. The charging rhino slammed into two members of the Shadow Wolf pack, killing them instantly, while the pack leader leaped aside directly into the path of the venom drake's snapping jaws. The drake bit down with crushing force, but caught the wolf instead of its intended human target in less than 5 minutes. Taeho had used the three Death World predators against each other until all three lay dead on the arena floor, killed, not by superior firepower, but by their own aggression turned into a weapon against them. The silence that followed was deeper than anything the arena had ever experienced. In the stands, alien spectators who had come to watch easy entertainment found themselves witnessing something that challenged everything they believed about combat and survival. Emperor Vorthak gripped his throne so tightly that his claws left permanent gouges in the metal. His yellow eyes burned with a mixture of rage and something that might have been the first stirrings of fear. The trials that had killed the greatest warriors in galactic history were being treated like training exercises by a single human. The sixth trial began immediately as psychic attack generators, hidden in the arena walls, came online. The mind maze had driven countless fighters insane with mental assaults designed to find every fear, every weakness, every painful memory, and turn them into weapons that destroyed sanity itself. Most species experienced the psychic attacks as overwhelming floods of terror that paralyzed their ability to think or move. Warriors would stand frozen in place while their minds were torn apart by artificial nightmares broadcast directly into their consciousness. Taeho had trained for psychological warfare during some of the most intense military preparation on Earth. His SEAL instructors had included mental conditioning that taught candidates how to compartmentalize psychological stress and function. Even under extreme mental pressure, as the psychic generators reached full power and began their assault, Taeho felt the familiar sensation of entering a combat mindset where external distractions became secondary to mission objectives. The artificial, fears and fabricated terrors washed over his disciplined mind like water over stone. He walked calmly through the mind maze, while illusions that should have driven him insane flickered around him like broken television broadcasts. His meditation. Training allowed him to observe the psychic attacks without being controlled by them, treating them as just another obstacle to navigate around. The crowd watched in stunned disbelief as the human moved through mental assaults that had shattered the minds of warriors whose species were naturally resistant to psychic attacks. Some aliens in the stands began looking at each other with expressions that had not been seen in Rokari-controlled space for generations. Hope was stirring in the hearts of enslaved beings across the galaxy as they watched broadcasts of the trials and realized that their supposedly invincible overlords were being systematically defeated by a single small human who refused to accept that anything was impossible. When Taeho emerged from the mind maze completely unaffected by attacks that should have left him screaming and clawing at his own face, the arena began to shake. Not from the trial mechanisms, but from the crowd itself. Billions of oppressed aliens were watching the broadcast and seeing something they had thought was gone forever. A warrior who could not be broken by any weapon the Rokari Empire possessed. The whispers in the stands grew louder as beings who had lived under tyranny for generations began to remember what resistance looked like. Emperor Vorthak stood up from his throne and his voice boomed across the arena with barely controlled fury. "Bring out the blood god," he commanded. "No more games, no more trials. This human dies now." The crowd fell silent as the final champion's gate began to open, revealing darkness that seemed to swallow light itself. From within that darkness came the sound of metal scraping against stone and breathing that sounded like wind through a graveyard. What emerged was a nightmare given physical form. The blood god stood 15 feet tall, covered in natural armor plating that had been stained black by centuries of spilled blood. 4 arms ended in claws that could cut through steel, and a mouthful of teeth like broken glass completed the image of death incarnate. The creature had killed over 1,000 warriors in single combat, adding their bones to a trophy wall that covered an entire chamber in his lair. Every major species in the galaxy had sent their greatest champions to face the blood god, and every single one had died screaming. Teho looked up at the ultimate weapon of the Rokari Empire and did something that froze the blood of every alien in the arena. He smiled. Not a nervous grin or fearful grimace, but the genuine smile of a professional who had finally found a worthy challenge. The blood god had never seen a reaction like this from any opponent. Every other warrior had shown fear or desperation or resignation, but this small human looked pleased to see him, as if the arrival of death itself was somehow a good thing. Around the galaxy, enslaved species watched their screens with growing excitement as they realized they were about to witness something unprecedented. The greatest champion of their oppressors was about to face someone who might actually defeat him. The arena fell into absolute silence as the blood god stepped fully into the fighting pit, his massive form casting shadows across the blood-stained sand. The ultimate champion of the Rokari Empire had not lost a single battle in over 2 centuries of combat, and his trophy collection included the bones of the greatest warriors from every major species in the galaxy. Tae-Ho Kim stood in the center of the arena, looking impossibly small compared to the 15-foot-tall monster approaching him. The human wore simple combat clothing with no armor or weapons, while the blood god was covered in natural plating that had deflected military-grade weapons for generations of warfare. Emperor Vorthak leaned forward on his throne, his yellow eyes gleaming with anticipation. This was the moment when the impossible run would finally end. The human had somehow survived trials that killed every other challenger, but no one could defeat the blood god in single combat. The creature moved with surprising grace for something so massive. Each step was calculated and precise, like a predator that had perfected the art of killing through centuries of practice. 4 arms ending in razor-sharp claws flexed and stretched as the blood god prepared to end this challenge the same way he had ended all the others. Around the arena, tens of thousands of alien spectators watched in fascination as the tiny human faced the ultimate weapon of their empire. The betting had stopped because no one believed there was any chance of the human surviving more than a few seconds against their greatest champion. But across the galaxy, on worlds enslaved by the Rokari Empire, billions of oppressed beings watched the broadcast with something that had been almost forgotten. Hope was stirring in hearts that had accepted defeat generations ago, as they witnessed someone who refused to acknowledge that anything was impossible. The blood god attacked with lightning speed that should have ended the fight before it truly began. 4 clawed arms struck simultaneously from different angles, designed to tear the human apart in a single coordinated assault that had killed countless warriors who thought they were fast enough to dodge. But Tae-Ho was not there. When the claws arrived, he had read the creature's body language and positioning the way his SEAL training had taught him to analyze enemy movements. Every slight shift in weight, every tensing of muscle, every change in breathing pattern told him exactly when and how the attack would come. The massive claws slashed through empty air as Tae-Ho flowed around the attack like water finding the path of least resistance. His movement was perfect economy of motion, wasting no energy, creating no openings, leaving no opportunities for his opponent to exploit. The crowd gasped as they realized the human had not only survived the blood god's opening attack, but had made it look easy. The creature that had killed 1,000 champions with his first strike had somehow missed a target that should have been impossible to avoid. The blood god paused for a moment, his ancient mind processing what had just happened. No warrior had ever completely avoided his initial assault. Most opponents managed to deflect or partially block the attack, but this human had simply not been where the claws expected to find him. Tae-ho used that moment of confusion to study his opponent more carefully. The blood god was incredibly strong and fast, but he fought with the confidence of someone who had never faced serious resistance. Every movement revealed centuries of victories against opponents who relied on strength, size, or natural weapons to win battles. But humans had learned to defeat bigger, stronger enemies through superior technique, tactical thinking, and the willingness to use any advantage available. The blood god had never fought someone who had been trained from childhood to turn enemy strengths into weaknesses. The second exchange began when the blood god launched a series of combination attacks using all 4 arms in complex patterns designed to overwhelm any defense through sheer volume of strikes. But Tae-ho had sparred against multiple opponents during training exercises that prepared SEALs for outnumbered combat situations. He moved like smoke through the storm of claws, never quite where the blood god expected him to be. Every attack missed by inches as Tae-ho demonstrated footwork and spatial awareness that seemed impossible for someone his size. The human was fighting a creature 4 times his weight and height, but making it look like a training exercise. Around the arena, alien spectators began to whisper among themselves as they watched their ultimate champion struggle against an opponent who should have been dead within seconds. Some beings who had lived under Rokari rule for generations started to remember what it felt like to believe that resistance was possible. The blood god's attacks became more desperate as frustration replaced confidence. The creature had killed every type of warrior the galaxy had produced, but this human fought unlike anything in his experience. There were no wasted movements, no openings to exploit, no moments of panic that could be turned into opportunities. Emperor Vorthak rose from his throne, his massive clawed hands gripping the railing hard enough to leave permanent marks in the metal. His yellow eyes burned with rage and something that might have been the first stirrings of real fear. The impossible was happening before his eyes as a human made their greatest weapon look clumsy and predictable. Tae-ho had spent the first part of the battle studying his opponent and learning the blood god's patterns. Now he began to shift from pure defense to controlled offense. He started inflicting damage with surgical precision, targeting nerve clusters, pressure points, and joint gaps that exist. The silence stretched for heartbeats that felt like eternities. Then, from somewhere in the crowd, a single voice cried out. Not in the Rokari language, but in the tongue of one of their enslaved species. Others joined in, then more, until the arena shook with the sound of hope-given voice. Emperor Vorthak drew his ceremonial sword, the blade that had executed 1,000 defeated champions. But as he prepared to break tradition and kill this victorious human himself, something unprecedented happened. His own guard stepped back, not in fear of the human, but in recognition that killing a rightful victor would destroy what little legitimacy the Rokari Empire still possessed. "You have won," Vorthak hissed through clenched teeth. "By ancient law, you are free to go." Tae-ho looked up at the Emperor, then at the massive screens broadcasting across the galaxy. He understood that this moment was about more than his personal freedom. Billions of enslaved beings were watching, waiting to see what this small human would do next. "I claim the right of the victor," Tae-ho announced, his voice carrying clearly through the arena's speakers. "Not just freedom, but the right to speak truth." The Emperor could not refuse without losing face before the entire galaxy. Reluctantly, he gestured for Tae-ho to continue. "My name is Commander Tae-ho Kim of the Human Navy SEALs," he said, addressing not the Emperor but the cameras broadcasting to billions. "I come from a world called Earth, where every nation has warriors trained to do the impossible. What you saw today wasn't magic or luck. It was skill, determination, and the refusal to accept defeat." He paused, letting his words sink in across the galaxy. "The Rokari told you that humans were weak, that we would break easily. But weakness isn't about size or natural armor. Weakness is accepting that you cannot change your circumstances. Strength is standing up when everyone says you should stay down." As he spoke, reports began flooding in from across the galaxy. On a dozen worlds, enslaved species were rising up. Not in chaotic rebellion, but in organized resistance inspired by what they had witnessed. The image of a single small human defeating their oppressor's greatest champion had shattered the myth of Rokari invincibility. 6 months later, as Tae-ho stood on the bridge of a human fleet arriving to establish diplomatic relations with the newly freed systems, he reflected on how one smile in an arena had changed the course of galactic history. The Rokari Empire had not fallen overnight, but its grip on the galaxy had been broken by the simple demonstration that their greatest weapons could be defeated by skill, training, and the unshakable human belief that there was always a way to win. Behind him, Admiral So Young Park reviewed intelligence reports from their new alien allies. "Commander," she said with admiration, "when they assigned you to first contact duty, I don't think anyone expected it to go quite like this." Tae-ho smiled the same calm smile he had worn in the arena. "Ma'am, in SEAL training they teach you to expect the unexpected. Though I admit fighting a 15-foot monster on galactic television wasn't covered in any of our scenarios." As human ships moved through space alongside vessels from dozens of liberated worlds, the galaxy began to learn what Earth had known for centuries. Sometimes the greatest victories come not from the biggest weapons or the strongest armies, but from individuals who refuse to quit, who smile in the face of impossible odds, and who prove that the human spirit cannot be broken by any force in the universe.